Thank you so much, everybody, for being here. I am your host, Chris Duffy, and this is Wrong Answers Only. This show is produced by LabX, a public engagement program at the National Academy of Sciences. And for those of you who are joining us for the very first time, the National Academies is a private, nonprofit institution that gives the government objective, evidence-based advice. And Abe Lincoln is the one who signed it into existence. I bet you this is the only comedy show you can see online today that has a direct tie to Abraham Lincoln. You know what? I might even say not just today, maybe this whole week. It's the only one. LabX is the team at the National Academies that takes all that fancy science and makes it fun. They create video games, shows, board games, and video series to make it digestible, like tonight's show, Wrong Answers Only. And on today's show, you and our panel of comedians are going to learn all about research into the magic of yeast with a scientific expert, and also what he is like when he is not in the lab. And I want to point out before we get started that this is an interactive show, right? That's the beauty of doing it online. We want to hear your questions. We want to hear your jokes. We want you to play these games right along with us. And we want to hear your comments along the way. So if you look on your browser below where you're watching, you should have the ability to type comments and to see polls, which we're going to use throughout the show. And if you can't see that, you might need to get out of full screen. Sometimes that helps. Also, if you can't see it, it doesn't matter. You will still have a great time just watching the show. You don't need to participate, but we would love for you to participate if it's possible for you. To test out the polls, which you should see if you scroll down, we're going to throw up a test poll right now. So if you click over to that, you should be able to see that poll, and we're going to get your answer. So that test poll, the question is, what are your plans for the Ides of March? We're getting close to the Ides of March. So is your answer A, pretty typical stuff, just getting together with friends to stab Caesar? Is it B, I believe the Ides of March is a corporate holiday that was created by Hallmark and CBS? Okay, taking a real stand. Or C, I'm sacrificing a sheep to the goddess Jupiter. Or D, this poll is not working for me, kind of a meta option where you select that on the poll to tell us that the poll itself is not working. Okay, put those answers in. We'll see what your answers are. Great, great, great. If you're having trouble and the poll isn't working for you and you can't actually say D, no worries either. It does not matter. Okay, after tonight's show, after we're done with all the fun and the games, you're going to get a post-show email. And that email is going to have links for you to go deeper into our scientist's work, to see his research and his papers and get really into the science. It will also have more from each of our panelists. And this is very important, that email will have a trivia question based on the information in today's show. If you get that trivia question correct, well, you will join the immortals on the Wrong Answers Only Scroll of Glory. It is an honor that is among the highest in the known world. It is so valuable, and yet it cannot be purchased by money, only by answering this email correctly. And for the record, here are the folks who nailed the question about wine from our last episode. This is the Scroll of Glory. Congratulations to this illustrious list. Congratulations to Blaine, to Dawson, to Elena, to Emma, to Aaron, to Hillary, to Ishan, to Jair, to James, to Kay, to Kaylin, to Kira, to Kyla, to Laurel, to Linda, to Marina, to Marjorie, to Mary, to Mike, to Pam, to Peter, to Reagan, to Ricky, to Sheila, to Taylor, and of course to Javier Cabezas. Javier, you always, every month, you've gotten it in, but you submit right down to the wire. Everyone else is submitting the next day. Javier, you're sending them in like 3 weeks late, right before the next show, but you know what? You're still correct, so we put you on the list, but we're going to say just barely. And Javier, you got to be faster next time. So if you want to join Javier and you want to join all those other folks on our illustrious list, all you have to do is respond to the trivia question that's going to be in tonight's post-show email, and you could get on next month's Scroll of Glory. Also, in that email from last month, we had a show all about sparkling wine. We asked our viewers to share a sparkling wine memory with us. We had some incredible highlights. Here are two that I want to share. First, someone wrote, I once attended a very fancy party where I learned that if you accidentally sit on your glass of champagne because you forgot you put it there for the New Year's countdown, the damage to your hot black velvet skirt will be irreparable. Okay, that is incredible. That's a great lesson. Also, I'm so pleased that you did not injure your body as well. It sounds like that was a very painful place to sit and a shattered glass full of champagne. Here's another one. Another one that I want to share is someone wrote in and said, a friend was going to lop off the top of the champagne with a sword at his wedding. He practiced and really got quite good. He did it at his wedding and sliced through the bride's dress. No one was hurt, but it was tense for the rest of the reception. Okay, wow, that is 2 parties with sparkling wine that almost ended in serious injury. A sword at a wedding, never a good idea. That's what we learned. Okay, enough with the past. Let's get into the present. Let's get into the future. Let's get into tonight's show. Today, we have an incredible panel of comedians who are going to be playing our games. We have Josh Sharp, Carly Mosley, and CJ Hunt. Hello, thank you all so much for being here. Hello, hello, hello. And we have an unbelievable expert. We're going to find out who today's expert is, but instead of me explaining all about him and his work, we're going to hear from him in his own words. He is a synthetic biologist, and if you're like me, you might not actually understand what exactly a synthetic biologist is or what that means. So Sudeep is going to tell us a little bit about how his research touches on all sorts of parts of your life that you might not expect. Here's Sudeep to give us a little bit of a taste of synthetic biology and how yeast is involved in that. Here's Sudeep.
I think what I want people to think about is the traditions that you hold most dear, whether it be baking a loaf of bread, or if you worship, how you worship that, and what the important fragrances and material things that are important for worship, because all that is beginning to change in some really interesting and dark ways. The market is telling us that some of the things that we hold most dear is becoming rarer. If we were able to brew these rare, almost extinct fragrances in yeast, is that the same thing as using frankincense and myrrh, right? If you're Catholic, these anointing oils are becoming far more rare and far more expensive, right? If you were to get synthetic sources of those, right, what is the meaning that we're associating with that? Hi, my name is Sudeep Agarwala, and I'm a synthetic biologist.
Sudeep, thank you so much for being on the show and for letting us talk to you about your work. Thank you so much for being here.
Super excited. Thanks for having me.
Okay, so panelists, you're going to get a chance to talk a lot to Sudeep over the course of the show, but this is your first opportunity to ask a yeast expert, to ask a synthetic biologist about his work. We call this, you do what? Okay, so Josh, what is the first question that you want to ask a yeast scientist? What is it that you want to ask Sudeep about his work in yeast or synthetic biology?
I do want to know if you still can enjoy bread recreationally, or if it's now just sort of all work.
Great question.
Really, really good work. I mean, I think knowing a lot about the chemistry and what the yeast is doing inside of the bread, as well as what the flour is doing to make the yeast to do what it does, makes it all the more exciting. But you never get tired of bread, Josh. You never get tired of bread.
Yeah, that could definitely be on a t-shirt here. Okay, Carly, your turn.
Honestly, a rebuke to my dietitian from a scientist.
Yes.
You can tell them
I have a scientist who says I have to eat bread.
Carly, what's the first thing that you want to ask?
I think it's no secret that people have been really into bread baking kind of recreationally in the past 1 to 55 years that the pandemic's been going on. And I'm wondering how you respond to people kind of like noobs posting all this stuff about bread. Do you stay humble, or do you ever just kind of like pop off, so to speak?
I mean, obviously I pop off. Like, what's the fun thing?
Carly, I'm delighted to tell you, Carly, that not only does Sudeep pop off, but we have an entire segment designed just about Sudeep popping off about bread on Twitter, which we are going to get into in just a moment.
I'm going to have a good time. I'm going to like this show. I can tell.
Yes, for sure.
Well,
okay.
I just want to on that note, like people bake bread, and people have been baking bread for the past 2 years since the pandemic. Like,
it only started 2 years ago? Maybe I don't know the history of bread well enough.
You're going to love it, Josh.
Okay, cool.
I gotta check out this bread thing.
Yeah.
The point that I always make is that yeast is not just for bread anymore. And there's all sorts of, like, I'm South Asian. There's all sorts of foods from South Asia that use yeast. From all over the world, all these fermentation cultures, great hobbies to have while you're stuck at home. And yeast and microbes are all integral parts of that.
All right, CJ, what's your first question for Sudeep?
I don't want this to be triggering for conservatives, but yeast is alive, right? Yeast is a life form.
Yeast is a life form. That's right.
When it's in bread, it's alive.
When it's when it's in bread, it's alive. Even when it's baked, it's alive.
When it is in the package, in the grocery store, is it alive or is it hibernating or what's happening?
Not dead, only sleeping.
Wow. So it is sleeping indefinitely, but is still alive?
Yeah. I mean, it's. I think hibernating is a great way to explain that. You know, should we get into the details?
Well, it does also seem like from your tone, CJ, that you don't believe that when you go to sleep, you are still alive.
But I don't I can't be like, yeast can be asleep for like years in a grocery store and it's still alive.
Okay.
Oh, so it's not years. There's an expiration date on the back of back of those packets.
And it can die.
And then they die, right?
Okay,
they starve.
Okay, cool. Got it.
Well, also, we're getting a lot of questions already from the audience. And I want to say a lot of audience members are hitting this same joke. So we got to get it out there because I want to make sure that you hear the joke that people want to say, which is a synthetic biologist still a real biologist? Or are they mostly an android? Are they synthetic? How synthetic is the average synthetic biologist? Sudeep, would you like to respond to those series of jokes about whether you are a real person or a synthetic person?
I leave it to my colleagues and my husband to answer that. I don't think I can click that I'm not a robot button just yet.
Okay, great. We'll also get to that later in the show. This is perfect segues to what we're planning on doing. So look, obviously, one of the things that people think about when they think about yeast is they think about bread. That's one of the first things that comes to mind. And Carly, you set us up perfectly for this because Sudeep has made quite a name for himself on Twitter during the pandemic as the internet's favorite yeast scientist. Let's look at this tweet that went very viral from Sudeep. Friends, I learned last night over Zoom drinks that y'all are baking so much that there's a shortage of yeast. I, your local frumpy yeast geneticist, have come here to tell you this. There is never a shortage of yeast. Here is where I am a Viking. Instructions below. Okay, so Sudeep, just, the kind of tweet that you dream of. And we're going to play a little game with Twitter's self-proclaimed yeast Viking. Panelists, I'm going to show you a photo of bread, and then you are going to guess how Sudeep responded to that bread on Twitter. And I did not create any of these. These are all real photos that were tweeted at Sudeep and then real responses that Sudeep tweeted back. This game is called Yeasty Boys. Okay, so Josh, you are up first. How do you think that Sudeep responded to this Yeasty Boy? Let's see the Yeasty Boy. Okay, so Sudeep saw this Yeasty Boy. What did Sudeep say back when he saw that Yeasty Boy on Twitter? What do you think he said?
X marks the spot.
Ooh, that's very good. I love X marks the spot. Actually, here's what Sudeep.
I don't know if it's very good, Chris, but
it makes sense. It's connected to the photo. All right, we got it. I like the tone that you said it in. Here's what Sudeep actually said. Absolutely glorious. Absolutely glorious. Love that. I feel like you missed the X marks the spot on that, Sudeep.
I was just thinking, I was kicking myself right then. I should have Josh on retainer.
Yeah. Carly, we got one for you. Here's another Yeasty Boy. What do you think Sudeep said to this one? Now, this one had an action shot. You got to see the crumb as well. Carly, what do you think Sudeep said when he saw these photos of that beautiful Yeasty Boy?
I'm like 99% sure that he said good sponge with a little emoji of a British flag.
Oh, actually, it's not exactly right, but you really got the tone was very close. Let's see what Sudeep said. Friends, this is art. # rise of sourdough. And I do want to point out that is not a popular hashtag. Sudeep was really trying to get rise of sourdough trending, and it wasn't happening.
I do what I can.
Folks, if you're in the chat, we got to make it happen for Sudeep.
Yes, for sure.
It starts tonight.
It starts tonight begins the rise.
Tonight begins the rise of sourdough. # rise of sourdough. That's Sudeep trying to own some IP for an action movie franchise.
Yeah.
He gets sued by Batman.
Absolutely, for sure.
That's the dream. That's how you know you've made it.
Okay, CJ, we've got one for you. Let's see that final Yeasty Boy. How do you think Sudeep responded to this Yeasty Boy? Next up, there's the Yeasty Boy.
Oh, he's a happy boy.
That's one happy boy? Do you think that's what Sudeep said?
Yeah.
Okay, well, let's see what Sudeep actually said. Sudeep really was feeling poetic on this day. This was later in it, almost 3 years on, and the creations with wild yeast continue to amaze me. We shape the microbes around us into beautiful food. The microbes around us shape our memories and experiences. Sudeep, you got poetic on this one. This was
Guys,
like,
I need help with my tweets. I
Yeah,
need help
that's-
with my tweets.
No.
I know this is like a cutthroat competition between the three panelists, but I feel like CJ got a really hard one to guess.
yes, yes.
Isn't that a long poetry version of "Ooh, he's a happy boy"?
I do think.
Sudeep is the happy boy. that
Yes.
These
Can we
wild
give that
yeast
to CJ?
experiments are working on.
We're going to give CJ a point for that because he did convince me that that is the longer version. That actually, ooh, he's a happy
Ooh,
boy
he's
is
a
the
happy
short
boy.
version of this. Yeah.
People in the chat use that. You try to use that phrase in your regular life. Ooh, he's a
Yes,
happy
almost
boy.
3 years on, and the yeast creations continue to amaze me. I would recommend that everyone uses that in their life as much as possible.
The rise begins.
The rise
The
begins.
rise of
Hashtag
sourdough.
The rise of sourdough.
Also, Sudeep, I'm gonna say it. You love bread, my dude.
Yes, yes, he does.
I'm sorry.
Awesome.
Who here doesn't?
That's great.
Nice.
Well, Sudeep, here's a.
I think I love bread, but it's actually kind of moving to see you be like moved by bread.
I completely agree, CJ. I'm not joking.
Yeah.
I love how much you love bread.
Yes, I
What do you
completely.
say? Like everyone's like, this isn't like bread that people are like, they're not going out and buying packets of yeast or something like that. They're like scrounging yeast from around their cupboards, making it sort of come to life, and then like making beautiful things. Like it's pretty inspirational, right? Like it's
Well, it is inspirational. And in fact, literally someone has said in the chat already, that was so interesting. And Sudeep, you are very deep. This is beautiful. Sudeep, some questions from the chat. Let's just get some rapid fire answers from you, okay? Does yeast live in your stomach? Can it live in your stomach? Okay.
Yes.
Does yeast's life prolong when we put bread in the freezer?
It doesn't prolong. It goes to sleep much in the same way that it goes to sleep when it's in the jar in the grocery store.
Okay. And someone asked, how much of me is yeast? Which I assume is difficult because you don't know who this person is.
So yeast is a tiny bit, but bacteria, so let's talk about it. Yeast are fungal cells, and fungal cells look like human cells. Bacterial cells are about 1,000-fold smaller than yeast, right? And there are 10 times more bacterial cells in your body than there are human cells in your body. So yes, not that much of your body is probably yeast, but a ton of it is bacteria.
Okay. And then last one, how do you suggest someone who loves yeast celebrate Passover?
I always feel really put out during my husband's Jewish, and I always feel personally attacked when we have to clean out all of our cupboards of flour and yeast. So I don't have a good answer to that just yet. If you find something, let me know.
Sometimes by refraining from using something, it makes you appreciate it more when you come back. You know, Passover's not that long. You can survive.
Leave some yeast out for Elijah.
Yeah, you're definitely not supposed to do that. I can confirm you're definitely not supposed to.
I haven't read the story in a while. I might be getting some of it wrong.
Yeah. Okay. Well, let's get into some more facts about yeast, because while we've been talking about bread, obviously Sudeep has already mentioned this. We know that yeast is far from only being used in bread. In fact, Sudeep uses yeast for all sorts of different things in his research and in his work. And panelists, before the show, Sudeep sent me an email that included 5 things about yeast that people are often surprised by, kind of a custom BuzzFeed list for me from Sudeep. So I am going to ask you about that list right now in a game that we call Sudeep's Surprises. So before we get into the 5 that Sudeep gave me, let's hear 5 guesses from you. Rapid fire as fast as you can, as quickly as you can. What are 5 things that you think are surprising about yeast? CJ, as fast as you can. 5 things that are surprising about yeast, as fast as you can.
That men get yeast infections.
1.
That it's alive when it's in the grocery store, but it's just
2.
sleeping. That they communicate.
3. They don't have to be true.
That they have an unholy alliance with bacteria.
4.
That they're actually 10 times bigger than people assume.
5. Okay, great. All right. Carly, moving right into you. 5 as fast as you can.
Okay. Yeast responds to sunlight like a plant.
1.
Yeast grows faster if you play classical music for it.
2.
If you look really closely, you can see yeast in the background of the Super Bowl halftime show.
3.
Yeast briefly dated Pete Davidson.
4.
And yeast is actually spelled with a silent G at the front before the Y.
5. Incredible facts about yeast. Josh, let's go right to you.
Okay, yeast is actually very new. It's not old. Bread was not made with yeast before that.
1.
Okay, yes, of course. Yeast is yeast is found in your eyeballs.
2.
His name was WB Yeast, actually.
Okay, 3.
We've been misspelling it. Oh, also, I know, yeast is from the moon.
4.
Last of all, bread sucks.
Okay, 5. Wow. Okay. Not only did Josh give us 5 facts, but he also kind of transformed into a character, which was interesting. Very nice character study. Sudeep, you heard 15 facts about yeast. Whose would you say would you pick for the point on that one? Who do you think won on Sudeep's surprises here?
I don't want to seem biased, but most of CJ's were
all right. Well, that's great. CJ, correct. And you know what? It seems like actually there was some real overlap between CJ's 5 facts about yeast and Sudeep's. Let's see Sudeep's real list. Here's Sudeep's 5. Yeast is a health food. Yeast is surprisingly similar to human cells. The majority of insulin is made in yeast. It's possible yeast has been used in beer since before farming existed, and yeast is used in traditional foods worldwide. Okay, so Sudeep, we have already talked a little bit about how yeast is used in traditional foods worldwide. Give us a super quick answer of why yeast is a health food. Tell us about that.
Yeah. So as it turns out, human cells don't make all of the building blocks for proteins that you need, right? And you need to get a lot of those building blocks from your food. And a lot of traditional diets actually supplement rice with beans to have what we call a complete diet, right? Yeast and nutritional yeast flakes provide a lot of the vitamins and those building blocks to the diet. So there's a legend out there about how if you supplement your pet food with a little bit of nutritional yeast, it makes them live longer. Yeast was used during World War II, depending on where you were. Marmite in the UK or Vegemite in Australia was recommended for pregnant women to get those extra vitamins as a nutritional health supplement. And also, for a while, Guinness Beer had an advertising campaign, and I think it's still kind of out there, that says Guinness is good for you because this. Yeah, yeah.
I love it. It's great that they're like, listen, we'll just throw this out there. Maybe it's true. Guinness is good for you. It's good for you. Does that work?
But good source of calories, good source of vitamins, and good source of minerals from that beer. Yeah, so they really pushed that Guinness is good for you line for consumer products.
Okay, and then here's one. Your second one. CJ basically said this. It's also on yours. You think that yeast is very similar to human cells. It surprisingly looks very similar to human cells.
In fact, when I was a grad student, I was using yeast as a model for human disease, right? And as it turns out, a lot of the genes that are in yeast have their cousins in human cells as well. And if you can understand how those genes function in yeast, you can get a good sense of what's going on in human disease as well when those genes get messed up.
Okay, next one. Majority of human insulin is made in yeast. And can you, while you answer this one, can you kind of do the voice that Josh was doing?
I don't think I can, Josh. I'm sorry.
That's fair. I don't know. I really was taken over by a dark spirit.
Yes, it happens.
Really quickly, our grandparents or our parents, depending on how old we are, would have gotten the majority of their insulin if they're diabetic from slaughterhouses, right? And what would happen? You'd have a pig that would be slaughtered for meat, and the pancreas would be taken to a pharmaceutical company, and the insulin would be extracted from that pancreas and then sold, right? What's weird about that? Well, it means that your life and death is dependent on the pig supply, and the pigs take a really long time to mature, right? What we found out in the 70s and the 80s is that we can isolate the DNA fragment from pigs or human cells, right? That encode insulin, and we can put that into yeast. And using very similar techniques to the brewing techniques that we use to make beer or wine, we can now brew up a batch of insulin, right? And we can turn on and off the production of insulin, and no pig needs to get slaughtered, and you don't have to worry about the slaughterhouse providing pancreas in order to get your insulin.
Would that work in a post-apocalyptic situation? You know how a lot of post-apocalyptic things, they're like, diabetic people aren't going to be able to live. Could we make insulin through yeast then?
So I don't want to get the National Academies of Science under I don't want these companies suing the National Academies of Science.
No, I say do it, Sudeep. Lean in.
Yeah. Come on.
They've
Listen.
got so much money.
Hashtag sue the Academy.
Yeah, that's the second trending hashtag. None of us are full.
Rising.
I'll say in my fictional book that I am writing, I
Yes.
need some advice for my fiction book.
Yeah.
Also,
totally.
none of us are full-time employees of the Academy. It's fine. If they get sued, right? We're kind of walking away scot-free.
We're comedians. We're barely full-time employees of anything. So
That's exactly
whatever you
right.
wanna
Sudeep,
say.
I say go for it.
Guys, this
A
conversation.
lot of people are
really
suing
dark.
me.
Yeah, we're currently being sued by so many
I
pharmaceutical
say
companies.
bring them on.
Long story short, yeah, I mean, like there's some modifications you'd have to make, but like the production of protein through yeast is it's catching on. So
Wow.
Non-dairy milk is using different types of fungus, including yeast, to produce the proteins that are in non-dairy yogurt, right? And we're not talking about nut milk or nut yogurt. We're talking about things coming from, say, Perfect Day, and a lot of those proteins are coming through different fungi as well as different yeasts, right? Taking the meat out of the food chain, right? There's companies out there that are using yeast to produce vegetable burgers that bleed, right?
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, Sudeep, I think this says everything about the audience that we have for this show, is that as soon as you started talking about all the things that yeast could be used to produce, immediately this question came in. Can yeast be used to make psychedelic psilocybin?
Asking for a friend.
Asking for a friend, not trying to get it, but also if you could get it, I would give you a great price. Tell me where, Sudeep.
My name
email
is
me.
Jeff.
Yes. Jeff at psilocybinseekers.net.
So I'm just gonna be a little nerd and say I haven't read the paper that does psychedelics, but I do know that yeast can be made to make cannabinoids, pot, and opioids, right?
Okay.
Heroin.
Sounds right. Okay, I can't tell if this question, Sudeep,
What
that's
are we
coming in.
wasting our time on bread for?
Yeah.
What?
That would have
This
been
whole
way more
time?
fun. Way more fun.
Gosh,
pandemic
I'm
if we
not.
had to
I'm a
make it
synthetic
sourdough.
biologist for a reason.
Yeah.
Good point.
This whole time we've been able to make pot.
Yeah, imagine if instead of everyone making sourdough, they'd all been like, I've just been brewing up psychedelic drugs in my own house.
Using raisins in water.
Exactly right. Okay, I can't tell if this is a joke or not. It seems like it might be a joke that someone sent in, or it could just be a serious question. How difficult when cultivating yeast cells is it when you have to separate Brett, Saccharomyces, and lacto?
Could you repeat the question one last time? Sorry.
How difficult is it when cultivating yeast cells to separate Brett, Saccharomyces, and lacto?
Great.
Who the hell is Brett?
Yeah,
How is
Brett,
this
that's why I thought it might be a
joke?
joke.
Friends, I got this under control. Brettanomyces is a type of yeast.
Brett, there's a type of yeast just named Brett, and the other one is Saccharomyces?
So the king of the yeast that I love and have been studying is Saccharomyces cerevisiae. It's
Okay.
a yeast fungus. It's a
So
sugar
where's
fungus.
Brett? Where's Brett in there? Because Brett sounds like a tech bro. Brett is like
Is
there's
the Brett yeast bringing all sorts of toxic masculinity?
100% Brett is bringing toxic masculinity.
I know you're joking. I know you're joking.
But it's true.
But
He
Yes.
drives around in his
You're-
Jeep in the high school parking
Yes.
lot.
Yeah, they're like, please don't be alone with Brett, actually.
And no, you don't want to be brewing with Brettanomyces, right? Yeah. Brett gives weird off flavors, and you want to be selecting for them. And lactobacillus, that's a lot of the sourness that you get in sourdoughs. That's a bacteria. So sorry, one last time. Can you repeat that question one last time?
It was, how difficult is it to separate Brett, Saccharomyces, and lacto?
Yeah. So lactobacillus just look different. They're much smaller than yeast. Separating Brettanomyces from Saccharomyces is harder, but can definitely be done using different growth conditions.
Okay, great.
Really
Also,
good. I had the same question, of course, and I definitely
Yes,
could remember
yes.
the question and say it right now if I wanted to.
yeah, Josh, actually, why don't you just say, since you had that same question, why don't you just say back the question that's now been said 4
We
times?
got a tight show, Chris. I really don't want to waste any time.
Okay, of course, yeah. Thank you for.
I have the question in my head and remember all the words.
I would also say if there's one thing that someone who's watching this show would say for sure about it is that we haven't wasted any time. They'd be like, this was a tight show. It has been smooth and just working to the second. Great. Someone in the audience also did some research and wanted us to know that psilocybinsecrets.net is an unclaimed domain that we could start a business at. Okay.
Everyone Venmo me $3 to $5 and I'm going to get this off the ground. All right.
We're going to get it off the ground.
Yeah.
Okay, well, listen, we've heard a fair amount about Sudeep's research and what he's like as a scientist. Let's hear a little bit more about what Sudeep is like outside of the lab. This is a segment called Out of Office Reply. Okay, so for this segment, we interviewed Sudeep's husband, Paul. And okay, Sudeep, I have to say, you and Paul, you two seem to have the absolute most loving, adorable marriage that is on the entire planet. I was interviewing Paul and I kept trying to get him to
I hope he's a baker. I hope he's a baker.
I kept trying to get him to say funny things and Paul kept apologizing. Paul kept giving me an answer and then apologizing and being like, oh, I'm so sorry. This isn't a funny answer. It's just too sentimental and schmaltzy about how much I love Sudeep again, isn't it? And I was like, it was kind of, but that's okay. It's great. For example, I asked Paul the question, I said, what would Sudeep, if Sudeep was a product made with yeast, what would he be? And here is what he said.
I would say a chocolate babka, because well, he makes it a lot and it's delicious, and it's kind of got, you know, these hidden layers within it of like you discover more sweetness as you go. But again, it's schmaltzy. It's like.
Sudeep,
Okay,
as a fellow brown man, I would love to be called a chocolate babka by anyone.
Right?
I'm on these apps right now, and if I found someone who's like, I'm looking for a chocolate babka, I'd be like, I'm the one.
Yes.
I'm sweet, I'm thick.
You have hidden layers.
Yes. No, not really, no.
Well, I also love that he's like, the reason that came to mind is partly a metaphor, but also partly he has eaten a lot of chocolate babka in the last 2 weeks. He's largely containing chocolate babka right now. I also asked Paul, I said, Paul, what is it like to be married to a yeast scientist?
God.
And Paul said, and I want to say that this was the closest Paul ever got to saying anything that wasn't unabashedly just 100% positive. Paul said that Sudeep will sometimes take the scientific method home in terms of like running experiments again and again and again until they're optimized. And I was like, what do you mean by that? Like, what does that look like in your married life? And here is what Paul said.
He's a great cook. I'm a terrible cook. He doesn't realize that he has this habit, but he's got this habit of, if I make a dish and it's not very good, then about 1 or 2 weeks later, he will, and I think entirely unconsciously, make the same dish, but kind of show me what it's really meant to be like.
That's incredible right there.
I love my husband.
I was not emotionally equipped for this cute little accent on top of all this like genuine love. Whew.
Major reason I married him.
But I love that you're like, oh, well, let's just make sure we do know that it could be done perfectly if we optimized all of the techniques in the bacon.
I'm glad we can unroll this part of our marriage.
Yes.
You're saying all sorts of stuff on your breath. Turns out it can be edible.
Oh, well, it looks like my babka is gooey and has flakes on the inside. Okay.
When you follow the recipe,
Who needs couples therapy when you have a science podcast?
That's exactly right. You know, like if a streaming science show can't solve your marriage, then really, what is there? That's welcome to 2022. This is relationships in 2022. Okay. I want to just quickly note that someone in the audience has said, for some reason, I sense that you don't like Brett. I assume that this person's name is Brett, and that's why they wrote that. Someone else is also saying, fun fact, Kanye loves bread so much, he almost named his 6th album Yeast This, which, you know, I get. There's a nice little pun there. Thank you so much. Okay. Before we go and get into some more of this show, let's play a game of 2 truths and a lie. Let's figure out a little bit more about Sudeep. So let's play 2 truths and a lie. Here we go. Panelists, there are 2 of these facts are real about Sudeep. 1 is a lie that I made up. Which of these is the lie? Sudeep was prom king. Sudeep used to write classical music reviews for a Boston newspaper. Or Sudeep is friends with Salman Rushdie and they bake together. I would like for you to talk amongst yourselves, try and figure out which ones you each think are the lie. What do you think?
I just want to say I would vote for Sudeep for prom king.
I'd buy you as prom king.
Completely.
I also I've never read classical music before. I'm more of a nonfiction gal, but I would read Sudeep's classical music if he wrote it.
Can we be friends, guys? You're all
That one
next to me.
feels like a lie to me. That one feels like somebody trying to write something that sounds like the truth.
Okay, I hear you.
Mhm.
And my only thing is that, as Chris pointed out, you're ahead in whatever backwards point system is going on amongst the panelists. You are leading the points. So I don't
Which
know.
means I'm losing.
Oh, it's golf rules? Oh no, we're playing golf?
It's wrong answers only. So right answers are wrong and wrong answers are right. Come on,
I'm saying
keep up.
opposite day. Okay. But yeah, I hear you, CJ. I support it.
The Salman Rushdie one feels like a flex that I don't think Sudeep would bring up.
Right?
You know?
Mm.
He seems very humble. I don't know if he'd lead with that. Maybe the husband.
Yeah, I'm with
left,
that.
So maybe that's it.
Maybe Paul, yeah. Maybe Paul.
Paul would bring it up.
Paul would, honestly.
Paul would bring it up.
Would. Classic Paul behavior.
Okay, let's go down the line. CJ, which one do you think is the lie?
Okay, I'm agreed with the group. I think the lie is a Salman Rushdie one.
Okay, Carly, what do you think?
I kind of want to be a little rambunctious, so I'm going to say that the classical music one is a lie.
Okay, and Josh, what do you think?
I'll go with Carly's strategy of having sort of shoved CJ over to Salman Rushdie and now double up
Wow.
on classical music.
You guys
Okay,
screwed me.
Yeah, really like a Price is Right strategy of like letting the first person get
I
put
thought
out
we
on
were
the
a
ramp.
team.
CJ into thinking that that's the lie.
I thought
but
we
really,
were a
we all
team.
know. No,
Well, let's find out
agree.
which one is the lie. Sudeep is not friends with Salman Rushdie and they bake
Oh
together.
yeah, eat
How
my
amazing
yeast.
would that be?
However, important to know, Salman Rushdie did once waggle his eyebrows at Sudeep from an elevator.
Wow.
Sudeep made sure to tell me one time Salman Rushdie waggled his eyebrows at me from an elevator, which is basically being friends, very close to baking together.
Yes.
Yeah.
Hard to know if
Flex,
that's a good
flex.
or bad thing. Was he happy or angry to see you?
Well,
Is it what? Can we get a waggle demonstration?
Yeah, that's maybe what I need too.
I can't do it because I don't have those muscles. But like,
Oh,
I was like 19 and I was listening. I just finished Midnight's Children and I was gonna go hear him speak at this library in Chicago, and the elevators are really full, and like this gentleman walks in and he turns around and I sort of like pointed to him. He waggled his eyebrows at me as the door closed.
What if that's his thing? What if he's like, I love to be in an elevator right before the doors close and waggle?
Waggle time. Whoa. Okay. Well, we got some time for some more questions about yeast. So what do you think about yeast, about Sudeep's work? What are some things that you want to hear more about? Because we've covered a lot here.
Okay, I have one. So you said that yeast, we know so far that yeast cells can do amazing things like grow insulin. We know that yeast cells are also just very similar to human cells. Is it possible that we will ever discover like a parallel life form to us that's mostly yeast?
Mm.
I mean,
Again, for my novel.
I think that's gonna be hard, right? Like yeast lives in very different environments than mammals and humans do, right? Yeast lives on the surface of sugar-rich fruit. It lives on the surface of grains. That said, if you go back millions and millions and millions and millions of years from at the very beginning, right? It's not implausible that yeast and humans have a very, very early common ancestor.
Wow. And that the yeast people died out because there wasn't enough sweets?
In the yeast,
I'm not sure that that's what common ancestor meant here. That there
No,
was
that's
a
what you
yeast
said.
people
That's what you
before.
said.
No,
That's what
the
you
yeast,
said.
the yeast people died out because all the people dipped them in like queso and like fondue and
Yes.
Yes. And
Yeah.
that's where bread comes from? Oh my gosh, you said it here.
and we waged that war again in 2020.
Yes, we
rise,
waged.
rise.
Rise of the
Rise
sourdough.
up the sourdough!
Rise of the sourdough. Okay,
Radical
other-
yeast faction.
other questions about anything we've covered on here on the show so far?
I have a a question. So I feel like I hear a lot about like, specific strains of yeast and like really like old school bakeries in San Francisco. It's like this strain of yeast from whenever. How old could yeast actually be? And like, I guess I'm asking about like the lifespan of yeast in that kind of a setting.
Yeah. So it's really interesting. So I know this is a family show, but can we talk about alcohol at all?
100%. You can say anything you want. If there's a family watching this, they are irresponsible to the
What do you think's in
maximum
this coffee
degree.
mug? Come on, man.
Guinness is good for you, baby.
This is vodka, baby. Look at that.
If there's a family watching this, the children in that family are throwing back shots, guaranteed.
Yeah.
No, because I want to say like we talk about sourdough starters from like 200 years ago, but I'm just gonna be the bad guy in the room and say the yeast that's in the sourdough starter, that was in the sourdough starter 200 years ago, is definitely no longer there, right? And
oh, Sudeep, you are the bad guy.
I am texting the city of San Francisco.
That's the bad guy. Of all the things that I've heard in the world today, that's the bad guy one.
I'm so sorry. But brew houses, old breweries are really protective about the yeast strains that they use, and when they have a good yeast strain, they do everything in their power to protect that yeast strain, to the point where like very old breweries will brew a beer, bottle up that beer, spike fake yeast into that beer, right? So that no one can go into that bottle of beer and collect their proprietary yeast strain from it. So like these are century old beers and they preserved those strains for a really long time.
Wow.
So is there a practice again for the novel of competing businesses stealing yeast? Right. So like competing bakeries, people's going in and stealing that yeast so they can make that bread. Or beer. That's where that comes from.
So yeast espionage is a thing, mostly for beer brewing, or like, but there are big houses. Like, I don't know if any of you are home brewers, but White Labs sells yeast strains that they've characterized, right, and that people just buy from them because they don't want to maintain their yeast stocks at home. But there are massive yeast houses out there. Red Star, Lalamond, right? White Labs. They are all producing proprietary yeast strains and maintaining those lineages.
But who's in charge of enforcement with yeast espionage? I mean, like, is this a loophole that is not on the government's radar, or what's happening with it?
Do you call the FBI? Do you call the yeast police? Who do you call?
Yes.
Wait, CJ, is this for your novel?
Oh, this is for your novel. Yes.
Yeah. By the way, if you loved The Orchid Thief by Susan Orlean, you are going to be obsessed with The Yeast Hunter by CJ Hunt.
Yes.
Also, if yeast cells are so similar to human cells, I could go undercover as yeast and really uncover.
Yeah, you would.
You know?
This bottle of beer brought to you by Josh.
Yeah.
Yes. Well, is there, wait, I assume
it's
you
cool,
don't know.
I'm yeast, boys. It's cool.
It's cool. Someone in the audience is asking, how does yeast make sense? Is it like in perfume?
Yeah, so really interesting. So yeast is not in perfume, but we know the genes. So take this, we've actually done this at the company that I work for. We've taken the gene, we know what genes give roses their fragrance, right? And we know that those genes vary from different roses. I love growing roses. Different roses have different fragrances, and we know the variations in the genes which give those roses fragrances. What we've been able to do is right down the road from where I am in Boston, at Harvard, they have they've pressed extinct rose species, right? So now we're in the world of Jurassic Park, right? You go into
dangerous world, very dangerous world. If there's one thing I know about that world,
get out. We should not be in that world.
Definitely close the doors and lock them, because they can open the door, but they can't pick locks, as far as I know.
This world gets old after 2.
Yeah.
Happy ending to this story. But we're in the world of Jurassic Park now, right? So we go into these old dead flowers. We take tiny bits of their leaves. We sequence their DNA and figure out which version of the genes responsible for the fragrance that we have, and we put them into yeast, right? And now we can actually brew up a batch of this fragrance, right? A fragrance that hasn't been on planet Earth for 100, 200 years.
You were so busy trying to figure out if you could do it that you never stopped to ask if you should do it. And that's why these roses have killed my family now.
Yeast finds a way.
Yeast finds a way.
Clever girl.
Is the name of the perfume.
Yes, Clever Girl Perfume. Oh, yes. Also, someone in the chat is ready. Listen, if Paul ever starts slagging, someone in the chat is ready to snatch you up.
Also,
grows
yeah.
both roses and makes chocolate babka. This is a keeper. That is a keeper.
I also fell in love with Sudeep when it was like, I grow roses and I search for 100-year-old scents. It was like,
Yes.
what?
I'll get in line. I'll get in line too. Come on.
I just wrote down what can't Sudeep do.
There you go.
And I'm keeping it is a list, and it is for CJ's novel. So
Yes, and also that's ironically
Thank
what
you,
can't
thank
Sudeep do is the title of Sudeep's autobiography.
Also, I'm writing romantic fanfic for myself called Sudeep Secrets.
Yes. That I did copyright that, but I'm willing to license it to you. Okay. One last question from the audience, and then we're going to go into our final place here. What makes yeast unique? What makes yeast unique?
Yeah. So, oh man, I would just wish we had another hour. Like, yeast is great. The reason that yeast.
We love Sudeep. We're not listening to the info. We're just
Sudeep, keep going.
No, yeast is great because it takes sugar and it spits out alcohol, right? So like this is yeast.
Same, baby, same.
So this is yeast superpower because when you're on the surface of that grape, it is war. It is war with all the other bacteria, all the other fungus out there. It's sort of closing hour at your local bar, right? Because once that grape cracks open and a trickle of sugar comes out, what yeast does is it eats that sugar and it spits out alcohol and acid and kills off everything else, outside of it, right? And that's why we love it, because it makes alcohol and also it kills off everything else, right? So like this is why 13,000 years ago, people were using yeast because water was infected, but alcohol, it's grains with calories, and that alcohol has killed off everything else, right? So you don't get sick by drinking beer. You have energy and you've got a good source of water. Yeast is fantastic.
So when we're drinking beer, we're drinking the throw up of yeast after yeast ate fruit.
I'm afraid so.
Oh, wow.
Whoa, yeast got drunk and we're drinking yeast's puke.
That's not a tagline to put on a brewery. That's for sure. That's not going to sell it.
No, that's Guinness's new tagline.
Guinness, it's good for your health. It's also yeast's puke.
It's basically puke. Guinness.
Wait until I tell you about honeybees.
Oh no, don't tell us. How dare you?
I want to say now, but maybe not.
Yeah.
Okay. So just a factual clarification here. Someone is saying for all these old sourdough starters that Carly was asking about, it's not that they actually have lived that long, but they're descendants of that original special thing, right?
So yeah. just to talk about that, right? Like it's like the ship of Theseus, right? If you have a boat and you've replaced every bit of that boat, is it still the original boat? And the same thing's going on with these sourdough starters, right? You have a sourdough starter. You keep adding flour and water to it. That flour has its own set of yeast, right? The different conditions that you're storing the sourdough starter in can kill off the yeast quite a bit if you just let it go for a while and sits on your counter. A lot of that yeast dies away. So the lineage is definitely there, but the original yeast strains that were in the 200-year-old sourdough starter, those are probably long dead.
Okay, we got this. Is honestly, I know you said it. We obviously could talk to you for 3 more hours, but we got to move on. So last one, we couldn't do a comedy show that was about yeast. We can't finish without addressing yeast infections. Please.
They're hilarious.
They're fun.
Have to.
Do they happen
Everyone's
for men,
laughing.
and who should I see?
Asking for that same friend who asked about psychedelics.
For them?
Yes. Obviously, as Carly said, one of the sources of the most comedy in the world, people get a yeast infection, they start laughing. Sudeep, talk to us about it.
So this is why I voted for CJ's list of exciting yeast facts, because they definitely exist on men. So your skin is crawling with different types of yeasts, including baker's yeast. There are for immunocompromised people, yeast are a big problem, right? And there are pathogenic Saccharomyces cerevisiae out there. Very similar to the Saccharomyces that I'm breaking challah with, right? Or that you're using to brew beer. But they are on your skin, and they have just a slightly different set of genes, and they can get in there and cause some real damage. Along with sort of the fungus which causes yeast infections, slightly different type of fungus, but that is also living on your skin. So like there's a ton of different fungi on your skin that can cause a lot of damage, even in men.
Okay, well, Sudeep.
But it's no reason for the people at your gym to make fun of you.
Yes, it is totally normal.
Especially if they're all doctors and you're like, what is going on?
Yeah, and they're like, this isn't a gym, it's a hospital.
You're like, why did I bring these?
Okay, well, thank you so much, Sudeep. We are coming to the end of the show, so let's check in on our score. It looks like CJ has the most points, and it looks like Josh has the least. So Josh won by having the best wrong answers, and CJ, you lost by winning. The only clear loser is Carly by being in the middle. Carly, next time, do better or do worse. Pick a side. Before we go, Sudeep, why should people care about your research?
Listen, we talked about it in the intro, but a lot of things which are in the world, a lot of things which we care about a lot are disappearing because of climate change, or because of just shifts in the environment, and they're disappearing. And one of the things that we can do is to try to preserve them. There's a few things we can do. We can say goodbye to them, which is painful and causes a lot of issues. We can try to preserve them. And I don't think people realize how fraught that is, right? Because you have to think about what preserving them actually means, and what preserving them means when you have lost the original thing. And that's the world we're living in. We're living in a real world Jurassic Park situation. We can manipulate DNA and recreate stuff that has gone away.
And if there's one thing that you hope that audience members take away from tonight's show, what's the one thing that you hope they take away?
Yeah, I think if it's one thing that I hope they take away, it's that how are we going to use this technology, and how are we going to, we talked about perfume, we talked about insulin, but what are we going to use this technology for, and how do we feel about that?
Great. Okay, panelists, that is what Sudeep hopes that you take away from tonight's show. What will you actually be taking away? Josh, what will you be taking away from today's show?
Well, listen, I found Sudeep to be so charming and passionate and kind and funny and loving. So the fact that he is synthetic really means he passes the Turing test with flying colors. No one has passed the Turing test better than this yeast bot right here.
Yes, I truly agree. Couldn't agree more. Carly, what will you be taking away from tonight's show?
I mean, similarly, Sudeep, you're just the best. I truly wish we had hours and hours and hours, because I have a lot more questions and could just listen to you talk forever. I love the idea that sometimes you gotta run the experiment a few times before things are optimized. I'm looking at myself, I'm looking at everybody else. I'm just saying, it's a great idea. And then as a side project, I would like to seek funding for the yeast espionage film, No Time to Rise.
Oh, wow.
Kind of cool. Venmo, breadfreak69 at google.com.
Bread freak.
Okay, now just to be clear, it's bread as in BREAD, not BRETT, Brett Freak.
No,
Bread freak.
honestly, but if that guy's on this call, I got a bone to pick with him, okay?
Yeah, because Brett Freak is a real problem here, okay? Yeah. CJ, what are you going to take away from tonight's show?
I'm taking away that that it is scientifically possible for there to be another species of humans who are rivals to us, who are made mostly of yeast, who we killed for competition, and that is where bread comes from. Okay. And I'm
No,
also
that's not it.
taking
There's
away-
more.
I'm also taking away that it's okay for men to have yeast infections.
Okay,
And
great.
Yeah.
Yep.
the doctors who are so buff at my gym shouldn't be able to make fun of me.
You know, what I love about what CJ took away is that he didn't come in wanting to take that away. He really got it from
Oh.
Sudeep.
Also, CJ, if those yeast people exist, we can get them drunk on Guinness. They will puke, and it will be more Guinness.
Yes.
And I believe that
Wow.
revolution will be called Rise of the Sourdough.
Rise of the sourdough.
No.
Sourdough. Rise of the sourdough. Thank you three so much for playing. You could not have been better. Thank you so much, Sudeep. If you are in the audience, thank you so much for watching. You're going to get an email after tonight's show with bonus information from Sudeep, links to go much deeper into his science and his research and his work, as well as links to get great jokes and comedy from each of our panelists so you can learn more about them. And of course, the trivia contest, which could get your name on next month's Scroll of Glory. We would also love to get any feedback from you about the show. We're always trying to make it better. We are trying to optimize in the scientific method style. So please, if you have feedback, we are always trying to improve. That is it for tonight, but we will be back in April with a show all about dinosaurs. Jurassic Park, someone said, we apparently live in Jurassic Park already, is what I will be taking away. So you can take that away and bring it right to April when we talk about dinosaurs. You can sign up for reminders for that show right now at labx.org/WAO. In the meantime, though, thank you so much to tonight's expert, Sudeep Agarwala, our panelists, Josh Sharp, Carly Mosley, and CJ Hunt. A special shout out to Imperial Yeast for the love and for the great questions. Thanks as well to everyone at the National Academy of Sciences and LabX and our back-end folks, Amechi, Jesse, Amir, Dempsey, Mario, and the whole tech team. I am your host, Chris Duffy, and this has been Wrong Answers Only. Find out more about this show and future episodes online at labx.org/WAO. You can also watch all of our past episodes on YouTube. Thanks so much. Have a great night. Rise of the sourdough. It begins.